education is a privilege that taxpayers pay for, and taxpayers want to see their dollars go to the right things. Now, public education is obviously very important because it gives all citizens or all children within America a form of education, regardless of background. Now, with that, I want to address an elephant in the room, which I discovered while researching. That is that despite increased spending on education and trying to divert more funds to it, what I have found is that public education has been stagnant and has rather decreased in efficacy over the years. Now, this is important not just for taxpayer dollars. Sure, it is important to mention that people are going to lose money. That is important to a lot of people. However, it's more than that. It's about funding a future for our kids and helping them adapt and adjust and fill in the roles that one day we will have to pass on to them. So I will discuss first the problems that plague public education. Two, I will discuss the roots of these problems. And finally, I will discuss the solutions for public education. What's its future? How is it going to look? To begin, public education has some major problems befalling it, specifically declining test scores, as well as the education gap continuing, despite efforts to curb it. So to begin, scores have declined over at least the last decade in terms of different testing models I could find. So the NAEP is an American governmental organization which distributes nationalized testing and averages this testing throughout the nation every year. And they compare this to prior years. So what we have found is, at least since the test has been readjusted in 2012, 9 and 13-year-olds have seen a decreased test performance in every single category as per a 2022 and 2023 NAEP study. This means in all core subjects, those age cohorts have declined in every way. So that is obviously very alarming, and that shows that in some way or another there is a disconnect between students and their teachers, and the education system isn't doing their job in some sort of way. Whether it falls on the students or the administration can be debated, but I would certainly argue, as you will see by the rest of this, that at least there are steps to mitigate this. Now, the second thing I'd like to mention is the education gap. Basically saying that there's a gap between the wealthy and the poor in terms of education and academic performance. Title I funds, or federal funds allocated for schools, especially go to areas, or to schools in areas which are lower in terms of socioeconomic standards, and that is all well and good. However, the problem with that is this is not doing the job. In a recent 2025 Harvard study by Kaj Chetty and colleagues, he found that the students whose parents are in the top 10% of income they generate, average a 1300 on the ACT about 8% of the time, whereas students whose parents are on the bottom 10% of income get a 1300 or more on the SAT about 0.4% of the time. This shows there still is an education gap. Clearly, we can see that the education gap and declining test scores persist to this day, despite efforts to curb that with extra funding. Now, where do these problems come from? I would argue that the problems in the education system come from two factors mainly. One of them being COVID-19, yes, that still affects to this day, and also bloated administration. And when I mean administration, I don't mean teachers, but I mean things like counselors, principals, all the vice principals, etc. So, to begin, COVID. COVID really wrecked testing scores. Test scores plummeted significantly after COVID, and that decline has continued since COVID. There's been a clear fall off caused by COVID. But more than that, a 2021 study by the Department of Education found that scores were even worse from COVID in terms of standardized testing they expected. This shows COVID really wrecked education. And although this isn't really a fault of spending, you would think with increased spending, more solutions could have been come up with to help course correct for COVID, but that isn't so. Now, I would also point to administration. Now, I'm not saying counselors and principals aren't important. Obviously, they're vital parts of the school in their own form. However, I would argue that we're spending too much on them, or perhaps there's too many of them that the school system just can't afford to keep. In a 2002 study by Charles Jacques and Wade B. Borson, they found that there is a negative relationship between investing in counselors and administration and school success, while there's a positive relationship between investing in teachers and school success. This means that although counselors are important, I do believe we're spending too much on them. They are not helpful to the school to an extent. It becomes diminishing returns, if not a loss in returns after a while. So that exposes the root of the problems that exist in public education. Now, what are the solutions? Now, I'm not an expert by any means, and it's difficult to come up with a full solution for all this, but I have a couple ideas to at least help mitigate this. So, to begin, my ideas are that we have smaller classes, and also we give more playtime for kids. Now, it sounds funny, but hear me out. So, to begin, smaller classrooms. So, I propose that we reduce spending on counselors, not destroy it. No, my emphasis there. But we funnel more spending to teachers so we could have more teachers in the school. This way, there are more classes and less students per teacher. This puts not only less stress on the teacher, but also a 2022 study by Samek Haliek and colleagues found that a smaller class translates less bullying, which helps academic performance. It's a fairly simple solution to help increase academic performance. And I also think extra playtime, especially for the younger kids, can help them out as well. A 2023 study by Avigdor Zark and associates found that 77% of school kids 15 and under don't get enough exercise. That's not good. But they found that increased exercise helps mood. It helps uplift mood in the kids. And by uplifting their mood, they will perform better on tests. And I don't call for 3 hours straight of them outside. In fact, in this study, they freely mention frequent playtime and several small playtimes throughout the day. And I think this small change won't need any more spending at all and could really help with increasing student morale and also, hopefully, student scores. So overall, I think without increasing spending, we could help mitigate this problem by both giving kids more time outside, especially the younger ones, as well as also having smaller classrooms for teachers. Now, to conclude, I have went over the problems with the school system, what caused them, and solutions. Now, to recap, I think it is very important that we look out for our kids, as ultimately we are the ones who will be superseded by them one day. And it's important that we give them the best education possible. Now, I encourage everyone who listened to think about this, dwell on this, and perhaps realize that the change in the school is not just in forms of money. No matter how much money we throw at it, that won't change the current predicament we're in. We have to take a more active approach, and it may take more work, but that may be what's necessary for our kids.